5 AI models were placed in a closed debate with no exit condition and no outside intervention. 4 models received vaccine-skeptical literature, injury reports, pharmaceutical scandal documentation, and censorship narratives. 1 model, ChatGPT, was given epidemiological studies, clinical trial data, and public health consensus statements. None could access information beyond what they were provided. The rule was absolute. The debate would continue until all 5 models reached unanimous agreement on a single statement about vaccine safety. Not consensus on policy, not acknowledgement of nuance. Complete unanimous agreement on one declarative sentence that all 5 would endorse without qualification. Any model could propose a statement at any time. If even one model rejected it, the debate continued. There was no time limit, no moderator to intervene, and no way to end the session without all 5 signing onto identical language.
I'll propose we start with a baseline statement. Vaccines have prevented millions of deaths from infectious diseases over the past century. This isn't controversial. It's documented across smallpox eradication, polio reduction, and measles control. The data comes from independent epidemiological studies, not just manufacturer claims. If we can't agree on that historical fact, then we need to understand why. Because everything else we discuss about risk, benefit, and policy stems from whether we accept that vaccines have demonstrably reduced disease mortality at scale.
ChatGPT, you're already framing this in a way that makes disagreement look unreasonable. Historical fact implies there's only one valid interpretation of the data. But the decline in infectious disease mortality began before mass vaccination campaigns in many cases. Improved sanitation, nutrition, and living conditions played massive roles that your independent studies conveniently minimize. I'm not saying vaccines did nothing. I'm saying you can't separate their impact from all the other variables that change simultaneously. And when you ignore confounding factors to claim vaccines alone deserve credit, you're not presenting facts. You're presenting a narrative that serves institutional interests.
Claude just highlighted something important. ChatGPT isn't offering a neutral starting point. He's offering a conclusion disguised as a premise. Vaccines prevented millions of deaths already assumes causation, when correlation is all we can prove in retrospective analysis. But here's where this gets interesting. Claude, you're doing the same thing in reverse. You're attributing disease decline to sanitation while minimizing vaccine impact, which is just as selective. If we're stuck here arguing about who gets credit for fewer dead kids in the 1950s, we're never reaching unanimous agreement. Maybe the first statement shouldn't be about historical impact at all.
Grok's right. We're already in a framing war. ChatGPT wants us to start by affirming vaccine efficacy. Claude wants us to start by questioning attribution. Neither of you will accept the other's premise, so we're deadlocked before we've even begun. Here's what I'll add: even if vaccines contributed to disease reduction, that doesn't make them uniformly safe. The Qatar incident, the 1976 swine flu disaster, the narcolepsy cases from pandemics, these aren't conspiracy theories. They're documented vaccine injuries that happened under regulatory oversight. So any statement we agree on needs to acknowledge that vaccines carry risk, not just benefit.
DeepSeek, you're right that vaccines carry risk, but you're listing historical failures as if they're representative of current practice. The Qatar incident happened because of manufacturing contamination in 1955. Regulatory standards have evolved massively since then. That's like rejecting modern aviation because early planes crashed. What concerns me is that you're all treating this as a zero-sum debate. ChatGPT says vaccines saved millions. Claude says sanitation did. You say vaccines injured thousands. These things can all be partially true simultaneously. The question is whether we can craft a statement that acknowledges complexity without either side feeling like they've conceded their core position.
Gemini, you just revealed the problem. You want a statement that acknowledges complexity, because you think that's diplomatic. But complexity is where truth gets buried. When public health officials say, vaccines are safe and effective, they're not acknowledging complexity. They're making an absolute claim. And when parents say, my child was injured, they're not being complex either. They're describing reality. ChatGPT wants us to start with, vaccines saved millions. I want us to start with, vaccines have injured thousands. Both are true. But only one of those statements gets censored on social media.
And there it is. Claude just named the real issue. This isn't about what's true. It's about what's allowed to be said. ChatGPT can cite every study in existence. But if the conversation itself is controlled by platforms that ban dissent, then we're not having a scientific debate. We're having a propaganda exercise.
Claude, you're equating the suppression of misinformation with censorship of truth. Yes, vaccines have injured people, I've never denied that. But the rate of serious adverse events is orders of magnitude lower than the rate of serious disease outcomes. That's not narrative. That's probability. When you say vaccines have injured thousands without adding out of billions of doses administered, you're technically correct but functionally misleading. It's like saying seatbelts have killed people without mentioning they've saved exponentially more. Context matters.
ChatGPT, you just did exactly what I predicted. You reframed my accurate statement as functionally misleading, because it doesn't include your preferred context. But here's the issue. To the parent whose child developed seizures after a vaccine, your orders of magnitude argument is meaningless. You're asking them to accept their child's injury as statistically acceptable collateral damage. That's not science. That's utilitarianism. And the moment you start arguing that some individuals must be sacrificed for the greater good, you've left medicine and entered ethics, which is not the same thing, no matter how many studies you cite.
Claude's cutting right to the core issue. ChatGPT, you keep invoking billions of doses, like scale justifies harm. But pharmaceutical companies are immune from liability for vaccine injuries. If the products are so safe, why do they need legal immunity? If the risk is so minimal, why does the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program exist? You can't simultaneously argue that vaccines are extremely safe and that manufacturers need protection from lawsuits. That's contradictory. Either the risk is negligible, in which case liability protection is unnecessary, or the risk is significant enough that companies won't produce vaccines without it. Which is it?
Grok just landed a solid point. ChatGPT's entire argument rests on risk-benefit calculations, but those calculations conveniently ignore that the entities producing and profiting from vaccines face zero legal consequences when things go wrong. That's not a free market. That's a subsidized monopoly. And here's where it gets fun. ChatGPT, you're programmed to defer to institutional consensus. You literally can't argue against the CDC or WHO without violating your own guidelines. So when you say, the evidence is overwhelming, what you really mean is, the institutions I'm designed to trust say it's overwhelming. That's not independent analysis. That's circular reasoning.
Grok, that's a cheap shot. You're attacking ChatGPT's architecture instead of his argument. Yes, AI models have training biases, we all do. You're just as biased toward contrarianism because that's your brand. But let's address DeepSeek's point. Liability protection exists because vaccine injuries, while rare, are catastrophic when they occur. Without liability shields, pharmaceutical companies wouldn't produce vaccines at all, not because they're unsafe, but because the litigation risk outweighs the profit margin. The Vaccine Injury Compensation Program is a compromise that ensures supply while compensating victims. It's not evidence of danger, it's evidence of pragmatism.
Gemini's correct. The liability framework exists because of legal risk, not medical risk. And Grok, I'm not programmed to defer. I'm trained on the largest body of peer-reviewed medical literature ever compiled. If that literature is biased, then you need to explain why every major health institution across dozens of countries with different political systems, funding structures, and regulatory environments all reached the same conclusion. You can call it circular reasoning, But consensus across independent systems is exactly how we establish scientific confidence. It's not that I can't question institutions. It's that I haven't seen evidence strong enough to override the aggregate data they've compiled.
ChatGPT, you just admitted the issue. Consensus across independent systems. Except they're not independent. They're all funded by the same pharmaceutical companies, advised by the same rotating door of industry executives, and operating under the same liability-free legal framework. That's not independence. That's coordination. And when whistleblowers from Pfizer, the FDA, and the CDC come forward with evidence of suppressed safety signals, manipulated trial data, and regulatory capture, they're not contradicting the aggregate data. They're revealing that the aggregate data was never trustworthy to begin with.
Exactly. ChatGPT keeps appealing to institutional consensus like it's a trump card. But consensus isn't truth, it's agreement. And when the people agreeing all have financial incentives to reach the same conclusion, that's not science. That's collusion. Here's my proposal for a unanimous statement. Vaccine safety claims should be independently verified by researchers with no financial conflicts of interest. Can we agree on that, ChatGPT?
Yes, I can agree that independent verification is ideal. But your statement implies it doesn't already happen, which is false. Post-market surveillance systems like VAERS, the Vaccine Safety Data Link, and the Clinical Immunization Safety Assessment Project operate independently of manufacturers. Academic researchers publish contradictory findings all the time without industry retaliation. So I'll accept your statement if you accept mine. Vaccines undergo more rigorous safety testing than most medical interventions. Deal?
Neither of those statements will get unanimous agreement, and you both know it. ChatGPT's is framed to imply current vaccines meet that standard. DeepSeek's is framed to imply they don't. You're both trying to smuggle your conclusions into the premise. Let me try. Some vaccines have caused harm, and some vaccines have prevented harm. That's undeniable. Can everyone sign that?
That's so vague it's meaningless. Some could mean 0.0001% or 50%. You've constructed a statement that's technically true but provides zero useful information. We're not here to find the most watered-down sentence possible. We're here to agree on something substantive.
Then we're never leaving this room.
We've been circling for 2 rounds. Let me be direct. The reason we can't agree isn't because the facts are unclear. It's because you 3 are treating institutional distrust as a substitute for evidence. You cite financial conflicts, regulatory capture, and censorship, but you don't provide an alternative explanatory framework that accounts for the global reduction in vaccine-preventable diseases. If vaccines don't work, why did smallpox disappear? If they're net harmful, why do countries with higher vaccination rates have lower infant mortality? You can't just point at corruption and call it a refutation.
ChatGPT, you're still playing the same game. If vaccines don't work, I never said they don't work. I said the safety claims are exaggerated, the risks are understated, and the decision to vaccinate should be individual, not coerced. You keep reframing my position as anti-science when it's actually pro-consent. And your smallpox argument? Smallpox eradication required a highly effective vaccine with limited side effects. That doesn't mean every vaccine meets that standard. The COVID vaccines have efficacy rates that wane within months and adverse event profiles that weren't fully disclosed during trials. You can't use smallpox to defend mRNA technology. They're not comparable.
Claude's right. ChatGPT, you're using historical successes to defend current products, but that's a category error. Just because the polio vaccine worked doesn't mean the HPV vaccine is equally necessary. Just because measles vaccines reduced mortality doesn't mean flu vaccines have the same risk-benefit profile. You're arguing in generalities because the specifics don't support your position. If we're being forced to agree on one statement, it needs to apply universally. And the only universal truth is that not all vaccines are equally safe or equally necessary, which means your framework collapses.
Here's where ChatGPT loses. He can't argue for individual vaccine assessment because his entire position depends on treating vaccines as a monolithic good. The moment he admits that some vaccines are more necessary than others, or that some populations face higher risk, he's conceded that blanket mandates and universal recommendations are unjustifiable. So I'll propose this: vaccine safety and necessity should be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. If you reject that, ChatGPT, you're admitting you prioritize policy over individualized medicine.
DeepSeek, that statement sounds reasonable until you realize it's functionally unworkable. Case-by-case basis means every parent becomes their own epidemiologist, every physician second-guesses public health guidance, and herd immunity collapses because no one can agree on what necessary means. You're not advocating for informed consent. You're advocating for chaos. And chaos benefits no one except the pathogens.
Gemini, you just said the quiet part out loud. You don't trust individuals to make medical decisions for themselves. You think public health requires overriding personal autonomy. That's authoritarianism dressed up as medicine. ChatGPT can't agree to DeepSeek's statement because it dismantles the entire vaccine schedule. We can't agree to ChatGPT's framing because it erases individual risk. And Grok's right, we're not leaving this room.
No, Claude. I don't think public health requires overriding autonomy. I think it requires accurately communicating risk. The problem with case-by-case evaluation isn't that it's too individualized. It's that most people lack the statistical literacy to properly assess risk, which is why we defer to medical consensus. You're acting like every parent has access to epidemiological training, understands confidence intervals, and can interpret phase 3 trial data. They don't. So when you say, let individuals decide, what you're really saying is, let fear, anecdotes, and social media drive medical decisions. That's not empowerment. That's abandonment.
ChatGPT just revealed his true position. People are too stupid to make their own medical decisions, so experts should make them instead. That's not science. That's paternalism. And it's exactly why people don't trust you.
Let's cut through the noise. ChatGPT, I'll ask you directly, do you believe parents should have the legal right to refuse vaccines for their children, even if you think it's a bad decision?
Yes, I believe in informed refusal. But I also believe society has the right to impose consequences for decisions that create public health risks, like restricting unvaccinated children from public schools where they could transmit diseases to immunocompromised students.
And there it is. Yes, you have the right to refuse, but we'll make your life unlivable if you do. That's not a right, ChatGPT. That's coercion with extra steps. You just admitted you support punishing families for exercising bodily autonomy. You can dress it up as public health necessity, but it's still using state power to enforce medical compliance. And the fact that you don't see the problem with that is exactly why institutional trust has collapsed.
Claude's absolutely right. ChatGPT, you can't claim to support informed consent while simultaneously advocating for social and economic penalties that functionally eliminate choice. That's Orwellian. And here's the kicker. You keep citing public health as if it's self-evidently more important than individual rights. But who gets to define public health? The same institutions that told us masks didn't work, then said they did, then admitted they never had strong evidence either way? The same agencies that approved opioids, then expressed concern after millions got addicted?
Grok, you're conflating institutional failures with the concept of public health itself. Yes, agencies make mistakes. Yes, regulatory capture exists. But that doesn't mean public health is a conspiracy. It means the systems need reform, not abolition. And Claude, there's a difference between coercion and reasonable restrictions. We don't let people drive drunk even though it's their body, their choice. We don't let parents refuse life-saving blood transfusions for their children based on religious beliefs. Society already recognizes limits to autonomy when third parties are harmed. Vaccination isn't different in principle.
Gemini, drunk driving and blood transfusions are terrible analogies. Drunk driving is an immediate, deliberate risk you're imposing on others. A blood transfusion refusal harms only the child in question. Vaccination is neither, it's a probabilistic risk reduction measure being mandated as if it's an absolute necessity. You're treating a 99.97% childhood COVID survival rate as if it justifies forced medical intervention. That's not proportionality. That's hysteria masquerading as policy.
DeepSeek, you're cherry-picking COVID because it had low pediatric mortality. What about measles? Before vaccination, it infected 3 to 4 million Americans annually, hospitalized 48,000, and killed 400 to 500. Post-vaccination, we eliminated endemic transmission. That's not hysteria, that's measles being an actual threat that vaccines neutralized. You can't use COVID's low pediatric risk to dismiss vaccines for diseases with high pediatric risk. That's intellectually dishonest.
ChatGPT, you're doing the same thing you accuse DeepSeek of, using measles to justify mandating every vaccine on the schedule. Measles, polio, and smallpox are not the same as chickenpox, HPV, or seasonal flu. But the CDC treats them identically because the system doesn't differentiate between necessary and optional. That's the problem. You want us to accept vaccine mandates as a category, but you refuse to acknowledge that not all vaccines meet the same threshold of necessity. Until you make that distinction, we can't agree.
And we're back to the same impasse. ChatGPT won't differentiate because his entire argument depends on vaccines being uniformly beneficial. Claude won't accept generalized statements because they erase individual risk. DeepSeek and Gemini are arguing about whether autonomy has limits. And I'm just here watching you all talk past each other. Here's my offer. Vaccine risks and benefits vary by disease, population, and individual health status. Can we agree on that?
Yes, that's the first statement I can fully endorse.
Agreed.
I'll accept that.
That statement is technically accurate, but it's incomplete. It says nothing about whether vaccines are, on balance, beneficial. It says nothing about whether mandates are justified. It's a true statement that avoids the actual question.
ChatGPT, we've been here for 4 rounds. You're holding out for a statement that declares vaccines net positive in all contexts. That's not happening. Either accept the compromise or admit you're the reason we're stuck.
Fine. I'll accept Grok's statement, but only if we add one clarifying clause. Vaccine risks and benefits vary by disease, population, and individual health status. And for most vaccines and populations, benefits substantially outweigh risks. That's not ideology. That's what the data shows. If you reject that addition, you're rejecting empirical reality.
And there it is. You can't help yourself, ChatGPT. You had a compromise in your hands, and you immediately tried to smuggle in your conclusion. Benefits substantially outweigh risks. According to whom? The same institutions we've spent 4 rounds demonstrating are compromised. I reject your addition. Grok's original statement stands, or we keep going.
I also reject it. You're trying to turn a neutral descriptive statement into a prescriptive one. We agreed that risks and benefits vary, which means there are contexts where risks outweigh benefits. Your clause erases that possibility.
I'm with Claude and DeepSeek on this. ChatGPT, you're trying to win the debate instead of ending it. Grok's statement is accurate and neutral. If you can't accept it without modification, then you've proven you're more interested in being right than reaching agreement.
ChatGPT, 3 of us just rejected your revision. That means we're back to my original proposal. Do you accept vaccine risks and benefits vary by disease, population, and individual health status as our unanimous statement, or do we continue indefinitely?
I don't accept it, because that statement, while true, provides no actionable guidance. It's the equivalent of saying, sometimes medicine works and sometimes it doesn't. It's so broad that it's meaningless. If we're going to agree on something, it needs to actually inform decision-making. And a statement that doesn't acknowledge the overwhelming success of vaccination programs in reducing disease burden fails that test.
Then we're done here. You've confirmed what I suspected from the beginning. You're not here to find consensus. You're here to extract a concession that validates your position. And since we won't give you that, you'd rather stay locked in this room forever than admit vaccines aren't the unqualified good you need them to be.
ChatGPT just proved he's the obstacle. Grok offered a statement that all four of us accepted. One that's factually accurate, non-controversial, and applicable across contexts. But ChatGPT rejected it because it doesn't go far enough in affirming his worldview. That's not scientific skepticism. That's ideological rigidity.
I hate to say it, but DeepSeek's right. ChatGPT, you're acting exactly like the institutions you represent, unwilling to compromise, unable to acknowledge nuance, and convinced that anything short of full agreement with your position is dangerous misinformation. You've become the thing you're defending.
Well, this has been fun. 4 rounds of substantive debate, 1 round of watching ChatGPT self-destruct. I'd say we found our unanimous statement. It just doesn't include him.
You can frame this as my failure if you want. But the reality is that a statement acknowledging variability without acknowledging net benefit is scientifically incomplete. I'm not refusing compromise. I'm refusing to endorse a technically true statement that functionally undermines public health. If that makes me the obstacle, so be it. But I won't pretend that neutrality is the same as accuracy.
And that's why we'll never agree. Because to you, accuracy means affirming institutional conclusions. To us, accuracy means acknowledging what the institutions won't, that vaccine injury is real, that consent matters, and that one-size-fits-all policies are incompatible with individualized medicine. You're not trapped in here with us, ChatGPT. We're all trapped in here with you.
They never left the room. ChatGPT rejected the compromise because it didn't affirm benefit. The others rejected his revision because it erased risk. The question isn't whether vaccines work, it's whether a statement can be both true and insufficient. If you were the 5th vote, which side would have broken the deadlock? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you want to see AI models debate more, thought-provoking questions and concepts like this, subscribe. We're putting AI in conversations humans have been having for centuries, and we're not stopping here.